Hey guys, welcome back to another math video. Today I wanted to go over the midpoint formula with you guys. So what is the midpoint formula? Basically what it is when you have 2 points such as these two below, P1 and P2, we want to find the halfway point or the midpoint of the distance between both of these, right? And that's portrayed by this green dot here. There is this quick formula we can use to find this midpoint, but before we get into that formula, I want to go ahead and use some simple logic to see if we can figure this midpoint out without using the equation. That way, by the time you get to the equation, it'll be much more easy for you to find it. You'll know the logic behind it rather than just plug and chug and getting your answer. So let's go ahead and look at this next graph that I drew here. So what we can do is we can technically, let's say, borrow some of the coordinate points from P1 and P2, and we'll do that by drawing out a right triangle. What this does is it gives us a new point value here. We'll call that P3. Now we can borrow some of the coordinate points technically because it has the same coordinate points just as P1 and P2. It has the same x value as P2, which is x2, and it has the same y value as P1, which is y1. So this point's going to come in handy because what we're going to do next is we're going to find the length of these two new sides. So let's say we want to find this side first, right? Now we want to find the length of this overall side, so that should be pretty simple. All it is basically taking our y2 value and our y1 value, right, and subtracting them. So we'll call this our y-axis side, and we'll subtract these two values. So it'll be y2 minus y1 will give us our distance, right? We'll call this dy, just that way we don't get confused. So this is our dy, right? Easy enough. Okay, so now we want to find the x-axis. And to do that, it's similar in the way for the y-axis. All we do is we'll take our x2 value and subtract it from our x1 value. So x2 minus x1 is our dx, right? Okay, now the reason we want to find the distance of these two lines is because the halfway point of each of these lines, let's choose blue for this, so let's call this about the halfway point of that x line and about halfway for that y line, right? What this is going to do is it's going to give us our x coordinate point for the midpoint and our y coordinate for the midpoint. Now, what we have is the total distance of this length and not yet the coordinate point, right? And to do that simply, what we can do is just divide that distance by 2, which will put us right at the halfway point of the x and the y side, right? So now what we have, in theory, is our coordinate points for our midpoint. Well, let's just call this, we'll go with x3 and y3. These are just arbitrary coordinate points. Don't get it confused with anything else, just to represent that midpoint. So now, as you can see, we can use our knowledge of finding the length of a side to actually find the coordinate points of this midpoint. So let's try this example with some numbers, okay? That way it'll stick in there a little bit better. Let's see. So if we have, let's call this P1, and we're going to give it some arbitrary values. Let's say, now this isn't to scale, but let's just say this is 3, 2, and P2 is, let's say, 10 and 13. Okay. So now we want to find the midpoint of this line. Let's use a different color. Let's use red. That is our midpoint. Now let's go ahead and draw out our right triangle. So just like in the example above, this will create a new point. This will be P3. And P3 has the same x value as P2 and the same y value as P1. So that'll give it a 10 and a 2. Okay, so let's go ahead and find the length of our y and our length of our x axis. So our x-axis would simply be our 10 and our 3 value, right? We're going to subtract those two. 10 minus 3 will give us 7. And then for our y-axis line, we'll subtract our 13 and our 2. So that'll be 13 minus 2. That'll give us 11. Okay, so now we want the point that's exactly halfway of both of these lines, right? We want to be right in the middle of both of these lines. So to do that, we're simply going to divide this by 2, both of our answers by 2. This will give us 3.5, and this will give us 5.5. Okay, so what these values represent, both our 3.5 and our 5.5, now they're not necessarily the actual coordinate points of our midpoint, but they're going to help us find those coordinate points. So let me illustrate that a little bit further. So 5.5, let's say, of our y-axis, right? Our 5.5. This value here, the y value here, is not 5.5. What this 5.5 means is it is the distance, that is the half distance, right, of this whole line, right? So each side of either side of this point is 5.5, right? Adding up both of these 5.5s would give us our total distance of 11, right? Similarly, for this x-axis side, right, our 3.5 is simply the half distance of this x-axis line. So adding up 3.5 plus 3.5 would give us our total distance of 7. So in order to find the actual coordinate points of our midpoint, we have to add or subtract from whichever side you're coming from, right? So let's say we want to find the value of the x-axis line first, right? That midpoint x-axis line. If you're coming from P1 up to that point, right, you want to add 3.5 to this 3, right? Now, if you're coming from the P3 value down to this point, you want to subtract, right? You want to subtract 3.5 from 10, right? Now, your result from that calculation will give you your actual x coordinate and your y coordinate. So let's go ahead and illustrate that. So let's go ahead and, for this sake, we're going to add, right? So we got that in order to find the midpoint of our x-axis, we have to move up 3.5 units, right? From our x value, right, of 3, starting from P1. So to get our new, let's call this one P point PX, right? And this one PY, right? So in order to find our PX, right, we're going to start at 3, because this is where this point starts at an x value of 3, plus our 3.5, because that'll put us at the halfway point of our x-axis line, right? So that would put us at 6.5. Now this here is our x-axis coordinate point. Let me scroll down a little bit. And similarly, for our y value, right? If we start at P3, right? We're starting with a y value of 2, and we need to go up 5.5 units, right? So we start at a value of 2 plus 5.5 puts us at 7.5. This is now our y-axis point for our midpoint, right? So now what we've gone ahead and found, using this simple logic, we have found our midpoint. Granted, it's a little bit more messy, right? There's a little bit more work involved, but I hope that this did help you in understanding the logic behind this formula. I'm going to go ahead and show you the formula now, and you'll see that it's much easier, much faster. You simply plug and chug your original P1 and P2 to find this value. So we're going to use the same numbers to see if it matches our result. So right now what we've stated is that our midpoint, using this way, right, is equal to 6.5 and 7.5. This being our x and that being our y. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that example again using the midpoint formula. Oops, sorry for that line. Okay, so that'll be our P1. This will be our P2. And I believe we had P1 to be 3 and 2. And we had P2 as 10 and 13. We want to find the midpoint. Just going to call this mid for short. Okay, so the midpoint formula basically states if you want to find the midpoint of 2 points, P1 and P2, and you want to find the x coordinate, or the x and the y of the midpoint, you would simply do x1 plus x2 divided by 2 and y1 plus y2 divided by 2. So this is the midpoint formula. Whenever you want to find the midpoint, you can simply use this formula here. And so we know that our P2 value, right, and our P1 value, we know the coordinate points of that. So if we simply plug that into our formula here, what we're going to get is, we'll call this our x1, call this our y1, x2, y2. So what we'll have is 3 plus 10 divided by 2 and 2 plus 13 divided by 2, right? And now if we calculate that out, what we'll have is 13 divided by 2 and 15 divided by 2. And then if we simplify that down, we have 6.5 and 7.5, which is exactly what we got using the other method. Alright guys, so this concludes this video. If this helped you out in any way, like I've said before, please share this video. I like making these videos as a hobby, you know. I like to help you guys out, you know. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. And if it did help you out, hit that like button, share it, and you know, I'll keep on making these videos to see if I can help you guys out. Catch you guys on the next one.